The sun sank low over Atlanta, Georgia, painting the clapboard houses of a quiet Baptist neighborhood in hues of gold and peach. In 1995, three boys burst into the world under that same sky, their cries weaving together in a hospital room like a single chord. Levi, Luke, and Logan Hale, identical triplets, were a miracle to their parents, a preacher father and a mother who taught Sunday school. With matching brown curls and hazel eyes, they were three drops of the same ink, indistinguishable to neighbors who cooed over their stroller. In their small brick home, filled with hymnals and polished crosses, the boys grew like vines tangled in close. They shared a bedroom, their cribs lined up against a wall papered with clouds, their giggles a melody that echoed through potluck, suppers, and church picnics. To the congregation, they were the Hale brothers, a perfect set, a gift from above. But even at 5, Levi was different. While Luke and Logan wrestled in the backyard, their knees grass-stained, Levi sat on the porch, captivated by his mother's sewing box, its threads a rainbow he longed to touch. He'd sneak her glossy magazines, tracing pictures of dresses and heels, his tiny fingers lingering on red stilettos that sparkled like rubies. At 7, he draped scarves over his shoulders, twirling in the attic when no one watched, feeling alive in ways he couldn't name. Luke and Logan, meanwhile, were their father's pride, charging down football fields, their helmets gleaming under Friday night lights. Their mother pinned their report cards to the fridge, straight A's glowing, while Levi's drawings of gowns stayed hidden under his mattress, a secret he guarded like a bruise. The difference grew sharper with time. At family dinners, their father's voice boomed about Luke's tackles or Logan's debate wins, his eyes skimming past Levi, who clutched a sketchbook under the table. Their mother, soft-spoken, would nudge Levi to join his brother's games, her smile tight when he asked for paint instead of a ball. Levi felt it, a quiet ache. He was the odd piece, the one who didn't fit their mold. But he kept it inside, believing love would hold them close, that his brothers saw him even if their parents didn't. Then came the church fair, when they were 13. Levi, bold for once, slipped into his mother's closet, heart pounding, and borrowed her red high heels. He hid them under his choir robe, stepping carefully down the hall, the click of heels a secret song. He thought no one would know, but his father caught him, his shadow filling the doorway. The preacher's face turned to stone. He grabbed the shoes, tore them apart in front of cousins and aunts, and threw them into a trash can, his voice a thunderclap. "Only girls wear these. You are not my son if you wear them." Levi stood frozen, eyes burning, Luke and Logan silent beside him. That day, something broke, not just the heels, but the bond he'd trusted. He didn't know it would be the start of a life apart, a path where the triplets who shared his face would become strangers. Will Levi find his place or lose his family forever? Subscribe to our channel for stories that shine through struggle. Don't miss what's next. Levi woke to the hum of New York City, his studio apartment in the East Village, a far cry from the Atlanta brick house where he'd grown up. At 18, he'd left behind the triplets' shared bedroom, the church hymns, and the weight of his father's glare after that day with the red heels. The memory still stung, sharp and cold, like a splinter he couldn't pull out. His parents had made it clear he didn't belong, and Luke and Logan, his identical brothers, had stood silent, their eyes averted as their father's words cut deep. Levi packed a single bag, boarded a bus north, and never looked back. He changed his last name to Hale, shedding the family tie like an old skin, and stepped into a world that both thrilled and terrified him. He thought distance would heal him, but the absence of his brothers, his mirror images, left a hollow he hadn't expected. New York was loud, relentless, a kaleidoscope of faces and dreams. Levi enrolled in a fashion design program at a community college, his savings from odd jobs barely covering tuition. He worked nights as a waiter in a diner off Broadway, dodging spilled coffee and rude customers, then mornings hauling boxes in a warehouse, his hands rough from cardboard. Every dollar went to rent, fabric, and sketch pads where he drew dresses that shimmered like the city's skyline. He loved the work, the way a needle could stitch his heart into silk, but the city didn't care. Some nights he ate instant noodles under a flickering bulb, wondering if he'd made a mistake. Yet he kept going, fueled by a fire no one in Atlanta had seen. He was building a life, one thread at a time, even if it meant doing it alone. Back in Georgia, Luke and Logan thrived in the world Levi had left. They attended the state university, their tuition paid by their parents, their faces beaming in family photos pinned to the church bulletin board. Levi heard through a cousin that their father had bought them matching trucks, then helped them start a real estate business together, their names on a shiny office sign. At Christmas, their mother mailed cards to relatives, each one showing Luke and Logan in crisp sweaters, the space where Levi should have been filled with the generic snow scene. He wasn't invited to Sunday dinners, wasn't called on birthdays. Once he dialed home, heart pounding, hoping for his mother's voice. His father answered, gruff and final. "Don't bother us," he said, and hung up. Levi sat on his mattress, the city's roar outside, and felt the cut of being erased. He found pieces of himself in New York's corners. At 21, he joined a design collective, a group of artists who met in a cramped loft, their laughter warm as they swapped stories of rejection and hope. They saw Levi not as the odd triplet, but as a creator with a spark. He started wearing what he loved again, bold scarves and tight jeans, his walk a little freer. At 26, he stood in a park during Pride, rainbow flags snapping in the wind, and came out publicly on a blog he'd started for his designs. "I'm gay," he wrote, fingers trembling. "I've always been. I'm done hiding." The post spread, comments pouring in from strangers who cheered his truth. He waited for a text, an email, anything from Luke, Logan, or his parents. His inbox stayed empty, the silence louder than New York's traffic. He thought of their faces identical to his and wondered if they'd ever known him at all. Levi kept designing, his sketches bolder, his dreams bigger. He worked late in a shared studio, sewing under a bare bulb, the city's pulse matching his own. He didn't need Atlanta's approval, didn't need his brother's voices. He was carving his place stitch by stitch in a world that hadn't been built for him. But deep down in the quiet moments, he couldn't shake the ache of being forgotten, of being the triplet no one claimed. He didn't know that years later, a call from home would force him to face the family who'd written him out, or that his past would collide with a future he'd fought so hard to make. Levi stood at the gate of Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, Atlanta's humid air heavy on his skin, pulling him back to a city he'd sworn never to see again. At 30, he was a different man from the boy who'd fled at 18, trading his family's name for hail and building a life in New York's frenetic pulse. His fashion designs, bold and unapologetic, had started to turn heads in small galleries. But the call that brought him here wasn't about art. A family friend's voice had cracked over the phone, telling him his mother was fading, her lungs too weak to hold on. Levi hadn't spoken to her since he left, hadn't heard from Luke or Logan since his public coming out 4 years ago. His blog post met with silence. Yet he bought a ticket, driven by a flicker of hope, a need to sit by her bed, to find some thread of the family he'd once known. He stepped into the terminal, heart pounding, unaware that Atlanta would tear open wounds he thought had scarred over. The hospital smelled of antiseptic, its corridors a maze of white walls and hurried footsteps. Levi clutched a bundle of daisies, their petals soft against his fingers, chosen because his mother used to pick them for the church altar. He dressed carefully, trading his usual vibrant shirts for a gray jacket, as if blending in could erase the years of distance. Outside her room, he paused, rehearsing words he'd never said. "I'm here. I love you." He knocked and a nurse ushered him in. His mother lay still, her face pale, machines beeping a steady rhythm. His father sat by her side, his preacher's hands clasped, his eyes lifting to meet Levi's. Before Levi could speak, his father rose, voice a low growl. "We don't need you here," he said, pointing to the door. His face as unyielding as it was that day he'd destroyed the red heels. A nurse hesitated, glancing between them, but Levi felt the room shrink, his father's words a blade. He set the daisies on a table, their stems trembling, and walked out, the hall's fluorescent lights blurring through unshed tears. He checked into a motel off Peachtree Road, its neon sign buzzing, and waited for a call that might let him back. He sent texts to Luke, to Logan, simple words, "I want to help." His phone stayed quiet, the brothers who shared his face as distant as ever. He visited the hospital daily, lingering in the cafeteria, hoping for a glimpse of his mother, but his father's shadow kept him away. When she died 3 months later, Levi learned through a cousin, no one bothering to tell him directly. He drove to the funeral, parking far from the church, and watched from behind an oak tree as Luke and Logan carried her casket, their suits pressed, their grief a wall he couldn't cross. He wanted to run to them, to share the ache, but their silence over the years, Christmas cards without his name, birthdays ignored, held him back like a chain. His father's death came faster, a heart attack 6 months later, news delivered by a lawyer's email. Levi returned for the will's reading, sitting in a cramped office that smelled of coffee and old paper. The lawyer, a woman with kind eyes, read the DITHE, unchanged since the triplets were young. The house, savings, and church trust split 3 ways. Levi Hale named alongside Luke and Logan. Levi's breath caught, the inclusion a shock after a decade of being nothing. But his brothers didn't agree. Luke, his voice calm, said, "He walked away from us. He doesn't live like we do." Logan nodded, adding, "Levi Hale isn't our family's name." They would file a lawsuit to strip him of his share, arguing he'd betrayed their blood, their faith. Levi stared at them, their faces his own, and felt a new pain, not for money, but for the boys he'd once chased through Atlanta's fields, now strangers in tailored coats. The fight spilled beyond the lawyer's office. A local news station ran a segment, and Twitter erupted with "triplet erased," thousands of posts debating Levi's place. Some championed him. Levi deserves his family's love, not their greed. Others echoed his brothers. He chose to leave, to change. Why should he get anything? Levi sat in his motel, the glow of his phone casting shadows, reading stories from others who'd been disowned, their words a lifeline. Reporters camped outside the church, cameras flashing as Luke and Logan left Sunday service, their lips tight, offering no comment. Levi traced a childhood photo in his wallet. 3 boys smiling, arms linked, and wondered why his brothers saw him as a ghost, not a sibling. The world watched, judging, but Levi felt alone, fighting for a name he'd claimed, a truth he'd built, in a city that had once tried to break him. Levi sat in his New York studio, a cramped loft in the Bowery where fabric scraps littered the floor like confetti. At 31, he was no stranger to struggle, his hands calloused from years of sewing late into the night, his dreams stitched into every design. The Atlanta lawsuit hung over him, Luke and Logan's fight to erase him from their parents' will, a constant hum in his mind. Twitter's #triplet erase trended daily, splitting strangers into camps, some cheering Levi's stand, others echoing his brother's claim that he'd betrayed their faith. He tried to focus, sketching heels that curved like sculpture, but the weight of being disowned pressed hard. Then a single moment changed everything, a spark that lit his world and drowned out the noise of his past. It started with a call from a stylist, her voice breathless. A Hollywood actress, known for bold roles and bolder fashion, had seen Levi's work at a Brooklyn showcase. She wanted his heels, a pair of crimson stilettos with hand-stitched soles for the Oscars red carpet. Levi froze, phone trembling, picturing the boy who'd once twirled in his mother's shoes. He sent the pair, barely sleeping as the ceremony neared. That night, he watched from a friend's couch, heart racing as the actress stepped out, her gown flowing, his heels catching every flash. The internet erupted, blogs naming Levi Hale the designer to watch, orders flooding his inbox. By morning, his name was everywhere, a comet streaking across the sky that had once seemed so dark. He didn't stop there. Levi poured his fire into a new vision, a brand born from the ashes of that Atlanta church hall where his father had torn apart his dreams. He called it Red 3, rejected at 13, a name that carried the weight of the red heels he'd loved and lost. His first collection was a love letter to that boy, each piece fierce and unyielding. The centerpiece was a replica of his mother's stilettos, exact in every detail, from the pointed toe to the shimmer that had made his heart race at 13. He announced it would be auctioned, all proceeds going to a charity for LGBTQ+ youth disowned by their families, kids like him who needed a hand, not a fist. The fashion world took notice, magazines booking interviews, galleries offering space. Levi worked through nights, his loft alive with thread and hope, his team of freelancers buzzing with the plans for a launch that felt bigger than himself. The lawsuit dragged on, court dates looming like storm clouds. Levi flew to Atlanta for hearings, sitting alone in wood-paneled rooms as Luke and Logan's lawyer argued he wasn't family, his changed name proof of disloyalty. Their faces, identical to his, stayed blank, their real estate empire funding a fight Levi could barely afford. Twitter kept the story alive. Hashtag triplet erased, now joined by Levi Hail Rising, supporters wearing red pins to court, their signs a splash of color against gray steps. Levi felt their warmth, strangers who saw him, but his brother's silence cut deeper than any ruling. He'd almost given up on them, on the triplets who'd once shared his laughter, when an email landed in his inbox, simple and unsigned, except for a name, Logan. It was short, formal, a request for a ticket to Ready 3's auction gala in New York. Then came the line that stopped Levi cold. "You may not forgive, but I want to see you walk that stage in the shoes our family tried to crush." He read it again, alone in his loft, the city's hum faint outside. Logan, the quiet triplet, now a corporate HR director, had never reached out, not when Levi came out, not when their parents died. Levi's fingers hovered over a reply, torn between anger and a flicker of something softer. He saw Logan at 10, sneaking him cookies before church, their secret against their father's rules. Was this an olive branch or another way to watch him fall? He sent the ticket, no note, his heart a tangle of doubt and defiance. The gala neared, and Ready 3's launch consumed him. He fitted models, checked lighting, and practiced his speech, words about resilience and truth. The heels, displayed under glass, drew gasps at previews. They read a beacon for anyone who'd been told they didn't belong. Levi stood taller, his designs a shield against the lawsuit's sting, against Luke and Logan's claim he wasn't theirs. The world was watching now, not just Atlanta's courts, but runways and screens, waiting to see what the boy in heels would do next. He didn't know that night would rewrite his story, or that one triplet's presence would shift the ground beneath him, leaving him to decide what family could mean. Levi adjusted his tie in a mirrored hall, New York's skyline glittering through the gala venue's windows, a constellation of lights that matched the fire in his chest. At 31, he stood on the edge of something bigger than himself. Red 3, his fashion brand born from the pain of rejection at 13, had become a beacon, its red heels a symbol for those told they didn't belong. Tonight's auction, held in a Manhattan ballroom, would sell the replica of his mother's stilettos, every dollar going to LGBTQ+ youth cast out by family. The lawsuit in Atlanta still loomed, Luke and Logan fighting to strip him from their parents' will, but Levi had found his ground. He'd sent Logan a ticket to this night, a small gesture after his brother's email, unsure if he'd see the triplet who shared his face. As the crowd gathered, their chatter rising, Levi felt ready, not just to sell a shoe, but to claim a truth no court could take. The room sparkled, tables draped in white, guests in gowns and tuxedos sipping wine under chandeliers. Levi scanned the faces, designers, activists, a few reporters searching for Logan's familiar jawline. He spotted him near the back, alone, his suit dark, eyes fixed on the stage. No Luke, no explanation, just Logan, the HR director who'd stayed silent for years. Levi's stomach twisted, memories of Atlanta flashing. 3 boys running through grass, their laughter one sound. He pushed it down, focusing on the heels displayed under glass, their red leather glowing like a promise kept. The MC called him up, and Levi stepped forward, lights warm on his skin, his voice steady as he began. "I was 13 when my father tore my shoes apart," he said, the crowd still. He said I wasn't his son. I spent years chasing their approval, their table. Tonight I'm done. I don't need their money, their name. These heels are for every kid told they're wrong, every heart that dares to shine. He paused, eyes finding Logan's, and spoke again. "I don't need a will to know my worth." The room erupted, applause thundering as bids climbed, the heels selling for $200,000, a sum Levi donated instantly to a shelter for queer teens. He stepped off the stage, legs shaking, and found a reporter waiting, her pen ready. "I used to beg for their seat," he whispered. "Now I build my own table with room for everyone they pushed away." The words spread online, #Levi Hail Rising trending beside #triplet erased, strangers sharing stories of their own fights, their own victories. Levi felt their voices, a chorus louder than his brother's silence, lifting him higher than any runway. Logan approached as the crowd thinned, his steps slow, face unreadable. "You did good," he said, voice low, then turned away. No hug, no more words. Levi watched him go, a pang in his chest, but no regret. Luke never came, never wrote. Their real estate office, a world apart. Back in his Bowery loft, Levi found a letter slipped under his door. No stamp, just his name in careful script. It was from his aunt, a woman who'd sat quiet at church suppers. "You're the only one who stood up," she wrote. "Not for heels, but for you." Levi held it, tears falling, the paper soft against his fingers. He didn't need Luke or Logan's approval. Didn't need a third of a house he'd never call home. Ready 3 grew, its collections gracing magazines, its mission a haven for artists who'd felt unseen. Levi hired designers like him, their work bold, their laughter filling a studio once silent. New York streets welcomed him, his heels clicking on pavement, each step a defiance of the boy told to shrink. He thought of Atlanta, of 3 cribs in a row, and smiled, not for what was lost, but for what he'd built, a family of choice, a legacy of courage. Levi stood alone, but he'd won, his heart whole, his colors unfading, a light for anyone who'd ever been erased. What's the table you're building for others? Share below and subscribe to join stories of triumph and truth.